Hello chess friends and welcome to Yazardov's chess channel and welcome to our knight, bishop and pawn strategy in chess. So this series is a separate playlist on my YouTube chess channel in which we are searching for positional trades of pieces. So in this series we're asking ourselves the question, when is it possible to give up the bishop for a knight? When is it possible to give up maybe the knight for a bishop? When is it possible to go maybe into a bishop's endgame? When is it possible to go maybe into knight's endgame? So in this series we're applying the strategies in order to get a better positional understanding in chess. So this is really important in chess because, as I mentioned many times, the queens and the rooks you shouldn't evaluate from a positional point of view. As I always mentioned, the queens and rooks are tactical pieces. What I mean about that is when you have a position, for instance, you have a bad bishop position, or yourself have a bad bishop position, or your opponent has a bad bishop position, it's still a bad bishop position if you have the queens on the board or if you don't have the queens on the board, because we should always first of all evaluate the strength of our minor pieces, the knights and the bishops, and then include the queen and the rooks into the strategy. So then we can of course create tactical threats. But in the beginning of the game you shouldn't evaluate the queen so much. And in an example, this is now our third exercise, so it's a game played by myself against a very strong opponent. I'll show you that the queens are not so important when you play an opening or maybe an early middle game stage. When you evaluate the position very well, then you don't have so many tactical problems. So I mentioned that also in my introduction video. So in order to get a better understanding of this particular video, first watch my introduction video, then you know more about this strategy. So as I said, don't watch the queen so much. Of course, your opponent can create tactical threats with the queen, but you can maybe solve these chess puzzles that are maybe 2-3 moves ahead. You should calculate these tactics, but to realize the strategy in chess is much more important, I believe, than maybe solve tactical puzzles. So let's check out now this game, and I'll ask you again some questions. So this will be sort of an exercise in which I'll ask you, should I give up maybe here the bishop for a knight, or should I not? Should I go maybe into maybe knight's endgame, or maybe into bishop's endgame? So these are the most important questions in this series. So here I opened with my common move d4, g6, knight to f3, bishop to g7. I played e4, and now we have c5. So it's a similar idea like in the hyper accelerated rank Sicilian defense, and I myself, I'm familiar with this opening. So the natural way is of course maybe to take d takes c5 or to play knight to c3. I decided to go into a more positional line with the move d5. If I take d takes c5, then the game can be tactical after potential queen to a5, queen takes c5. So I decided to block further the center because that's simply my style. I like to go more positionally into the game than tactically, and here my opponent tried e5. I played knight to c3, and after d6, here I want you to stop and already think about this position very well. So first of all, what we should realize that black has created the King's Indian pawn structure. So it means probably black will try the move f5, f4, followed with g5, g4. So black is trying here to go into common King's Indian attack. And I played on purpose this move knight to c3 instead of, for instance, playing the move c4 here immediately. I could go here c4, but the move knight to c3 leaves me a much more flexible position in the game. If I play the move c4, then the pawn structure is simply too blocked out in the center. So I played simple idea, developing the knight without the pawn move. So you should always avoid to play many pawn moves in the beginning. Here after the move d6, as I said, black has built a similar pawn structure like in the King's Indian and is trying to go with this common f5 idea. So, but there is one positional problem about this setup. First of all, what we should realize that many of these pawns in the center are on dark squares. So it means that this bishop is bad, and if we want to go much better into this middle game, we should always evaluate the strength of our minor pieces and also the strength of our opponent's pieces. So first of all, we should realize that we have here a little bit bad bishop position for ourselves. So it means this bishop on f1, although we could play maybe something like bishop to b5, then a knight to d7 could happen, and a6 b5. Black could kick away this bishop and we have lost the bishop pair. But the problem here in our position is that we don't have good ideas where to go with the bishop. So one of the best ideas for us is here maybe to give up this light square bishop for this light square bishop, because this light square bishop of blacks is perfectly fine. And as I said, the bishop on g7 is bad because it's blocked out by its own pawn. So in this exercise, you see now a couple of questions. As I said, I played simply now, first of all, the move bishop to g5. In the game, my opponent tried knight to e7, and I played the common bishop to e2. Here, after the move h6, the first question is here, should I go now for the knight? Should I take the knight or should I not? Because there is now really a tough choice to give up the bishop pair or not. But take your time and evaluate the strength of your pieces. Are the knights good, for instance, in this position? Are the bishops good? Here, after the move h6, I decided to go simply bishop takes e7. After queen to e7, okay, black has the bishop pair. There's nothing much I can do here after potential f5. I cannot prevent it. But what I said in the beginning, that we should maybe give up this bishop for this bishop. When you face the bishop pair in a middle game, then it's a very good thing to undermine the pressure of the bishop pair. So it means we should get rid of at least one of these bishops. So it means now there has to be a way how to trade off this light square bishops. As I said, bishop to b5 doesn't work because knight to d7 will happen. So we want to give up this bishop for this bishop. We don't want to give up this bishop for a knight. So in the game, I tried h3. This idea is to play something like knight to d2 or knight to h2, and then to play simply bishop to g4, then to trade off the bishop. But that's not possible immediately, because then I could face some f5 ideas after potential maybe e takes f5 and g takes f5. Again, I would have to remove my bishop on g4, so that's why I decided to, after castling, also to castle. So I'm delaying the situation here a little bit, but as a long-term plan, as I said, we want to get rid of this light square bishops. In the game, f5. So as I said, I cannot prevent this move. f4 will probably happen, and my opponent is going to go into this King's Indian attack. As I said, when we flip the board, f5, here g5, g4 is a possibility. So that's why the best way here is to proceed to go into favorable trades of pieces. So here I played knight to d2 after the move f4. Now I played simply this idea, bishop to g4. After a6, my opponent is trying also to create a flank attack here on b5. Now I simply took bishop takes c8, and after rook takes c8, we have queen to g4, and I have now really a comfortable game, because now the g6 pawn is hanging, the rook is hanging. In the game, my opponent tried rook to f8, and I simply grabbed the pawn. What you can notice is that black has still this bad bishop position, has now several light square problems. That was all possible because we traded off the light square bishops, and now our knights are perfectly fine. Although they are a little bit passive now on d2 and on c3, they are not doing so much. But in this blocked pawn structure, as I said, we have the blocked pawn structure in the center. The knight will always find a way into the game. We can maneuver the knight to f3, knight to h2, maybe knight to g4. So as I said, the knight will find a way into the game. You have to take your time. You have to play many moves, but these knights are perfectly fine. We have now a new position in which black has the bad bishop position. Okay, maybe black has still a flexible knight, but still we play with two good pieces against one good piece of black. So we are also pawn up, so it's of course a favorable continuation here for me. So here b5, again I'm facing a flank attack. You could get scared a little bit by this pawn storm on the queen side, but we'll come to that, how to solve that. Now it's time to get first of all our queen into the game. Queen to g4. Here the queen could be vulnerable to my opponent's attacks. In the game, a knight to d7, and I tried knight to f3. Here we have rook to f6. If knight to f6 happens, then I can maybe have some queen to e6 ideas, trading off the queens, followed with knight to d5. Could be a positional idea, so it's not a bad position. Or I could simply go queen to h4. In the game, my opponent tried rook to f6 with ideas king to h7, followed with rook to g6. I played now knight to h4, preventing this rook to g6 ideas, and now knight to g6. Knight to b6 was played by black. The idea is now to continue here with this potential pawn storm with b4, c4 ideas. In the game, I tried a4 because I want to stop a little bit black's progress on the queen side. A4, a very natural idea in the game. B4, but okay, black has gained now tempo on my knight. It seems that black is continuing the attack, but I played simply knight to b1. I hope you realize that so far nothing special can happen even on the queen side, because if black advanced the pawn here on c4, we have this setup in which 2 versus 2 pawns are happening. So whatever happens, let's see a possible continuation. After potential c4, I could maybe go something like a5, and here if the knight retreats, I could go here simply attacking maybe the pawn. If c3 happens, b takes c3, b takes c3, and I think after knight to b3, nothing special has changed. Still, I have opportunities to occupy this very weak f5 square, include my rook somehow into the game, maybe also through the b file. So you see, after the move here, a5 and here after the move a4 and b4, and then the move knight to b1, I don't think that black can make so much progress. In the game, black tried knight to c4, but again, it's not something special. I simply played b3, knight to a3 is not a possibility, knight to d2, because my knight is covering this very important square, so my opponent retreated simply with the move knight to b6, and I have now, of course, a very flexible move, knight to d2, again with the opportunities to play knight to c4, because I want to keep this position compact. What I don't want to allow is my opponent to maybe break the position on the queen side, maybe with something like rook to c8, maybe with c4, then my opponent could occupy maybe the c file, get this rook into the game. So I want to play a very nice defensive game, and after the move queen to f7, I kicked away simply the knight, a5, and here after knight to c8, I played knight to c4. So you see how the knights will, as I said, always find a way into the game. This is still a bad bishop, nothing has changed, bad bishop position here. Even, as I said, even if we trade off the queens here, still the position for black hasn't improved. Still, this is a bad bishop position. So that's what I mean. First of all, we solve positional problems like pawn structures, improvements of the position of the pieces. Even with the queens or without the queens, it's the same position. It's again the same position with the same weak square on f5, with the same weak bad bishop, with still a weak d6 pawn here. So even, as I said, the queens are not so important in our planning ideas in chess. So here king to h7 was played, knight to f5, here queen to c7, protecting here the d6 pawn. I played now king to h2, because now when I have the pieces on the best squares, you see I have a very powerful knight on f5, I have a very powerful knight on c4, I have a very active queen. Now it's the time to open the position, because you cannot keep the position static through the whole game. You have to open the position somewhere. So here the king to h2 idea is now to play rook to g1, and now opening the g file or maybe even the f file. So here in the game, rook to g6, not a problem, queen to f3, knight to e7, and I played simply g4. Supporting my knight in the game en passant, f takes g3 was played, and now f takes g3. If my opponent takes, of course, it's nothing, something special. I can play queen to f5, or even e takes f5 is a possibility. Then I would have a very powerful pawn. But I believe if my opponent would take here the knight on f5, I would simply take with the queen. So it's still playable, I believe, even if maybe there are some tactical threats with rook to f8. But again, I could sneak in here with the queen to h5, forcing a trades of rook. So in the game, rook to f8, here I played g4, supporting my knight, and now after rook to f8, rook to f6, I played rook to g1. Now finally with the ideas, as I said, to open the position on the g file. So in the game, bishop to h8 by my opponent. He probably thought that rook to g8 could be an idea to compete somehow, and I simply opened the position with the move g5. We have knight to f5. This was a positional sacrifice by my opponent in order to activate some pieces somehow, but after g takes f6, we have knight to d4, queen to g2. There is now this checkmate threat on g6, queen to f7 again. But again, I'm pointing out that this bishop was bad for the whole game. That was all possible because I gave up my bishop for this knight on e7 in a close position. Here in the game, a knight to d6 was played, deflecting the queen, and here after rook to f1, my opponent resigned. There's simply no good way how to defend here. Even if you cover with the queen on g5, the rook is hanging, so in this position my opponent resigned. So that's very important to realize. As I said, the pawn structures here after the move knight to e7 and bishop to e2, h6. Here bishop takes e7. So see how bad it was for my opponent to activate this dark square bishop. I continued with the strategy to give up this light square bishop for this light square bishop, because this bishop on c8 had a perfect activity. After this move f5, I delayed the situation here in the center. If something like f takes e5 happens, e4, pardon me, then knight to e4. Again, I created sort of a compact position, a blockade, never allowed this pawn advance. Here after knight to d7, maybe knight to f6 is a possibility to force my knight to move, but again, you see I have two knights that are covering this square. Again, I believe I would play on a simple idea to play bishop to g4, again forcing the trades of light square bishop. So okay, I hope that you realize these ideas. When is it good to trade off maybe bishop for a knight? I decided in this game that it's good to continue here with the two knights against the bishop pair. It was successful, but as I said, stop a little bit, watch the pawn structures, what's going on. Are these positions good for a knight? Are this position good for the bishops? And I hope that you can improve your strategical skills. And as I said, we'll continue this series. I believe this is very, very important, and it bothers most of us when we really go into this kind of endgames. And I think I can help you out with this very nice and instructive video. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Meanwhile, you can watch my other series videos from this series. Here is the link, and you can also watch my common basics in chess series videos, in which I show you opening principles, middle game strategies, and the end game strategies. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.